Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're zoning in on Section 3 of our offshore facility applications, production units. You know, an FPSO isn't just one giant, terrifying hazard zone. It's actually a completely fascinating, highly engineered stack of totally different risk levels. So we're going to zone the whole vessel, deck by deck, starting right at the topsides and working our way down to the tanks.
Let's just drop right onto the deck of this floating factory. From the wide open air of the upper modules down to the dark, sealed steel vaults deep inside the hull, every single square inch is meticulously classified. We're looking at the likelihood of an explosive atmosphere forming. We call this hazardous area classification, and honestly, it is the absolute foundation of offshore safety.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at a cross-section here, and you can see these really distinct visual layers stretching from the weather deck all the way down into the hull. We're basically dealing with three main hazardous zones: Zone 0, Zone 1, and Zone 2. As we move vertically, factors like natural wind ventilation and physical steel boundaries completely flip the risk profile deck by deck.
So we'll start way up top, on the highest deck. This is where all those heavy processing modules are. Now, you might naturally think the area handling all the live, high-pressure hydrocarbons would be the absolute most dangerous space on the ship, right? Well, actually, these open topsides are classified primarily as just Zone 2. And Zone 2 simply means an area where an explosive atmosphere is not likely in normal operations, but hey, it might exist for a short time if there's a leak. So why only Zone 2? Because the process topsides are explicitly designed for open, natural ventilation. The wind sweeps right through the equipment, rarely dropping below 0.5 meters per second, which rapidly dilutes any leaked gas. It's pretty clever.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that while the broad deck enjoys that general Zone 2 status, it's definitely not a blanket rule. You've got dense secondary sources of release absolutely everywhere up here. Flanges, block valves, sample points, you name it. So around those specific high-risk points, local Zone 1 pockets, think of them like invisible little bubbles, sit right inside that broader Zone 2 field. It's basically a localized envelope wrapping right around a valve where release is just slightly more likely to happen under normal conditions.
All right, let's transition vertically now. We're going from the fresh, windy air of the processing deck down into the dark, enclosed environment of the ship's hull. And the contrast here is literal night and day. Up top, the wind does the heavy lifting to dilute the hazard. But down below, we're dealing with trapped hydrocarbon vapors in a completely sealed environment. Drop down into the hull, and we enter the territory of the cargo and slop tanks. These interiors are permanently classified as Zone 0. By definition, Zone 0 means an explosive gas atmosphere is present continuously, or at least for very long periods. There are absolutely no ventilation calculations needed here, and there are zero exceptions. These are sealed vessels continuously holding crude oil or its vapors. That is your textbook continuous grade release scenario, and it is never, ever reclassified downward.
But what about the spaces right next door? If we move just one single steel plate over from that cargo tank, we're suddenly in Zone 1 territory. Normally, Zone 1 just means ignitable concentrations are likely under normal operating conditions. But down in the hull of an FPSO, there's a strict structural rule. Any enclosed space immediately adjacent to a Zone 0 tank, like cofferdams, void spaces, or ballast tanks, automatically gets classified as Zone 1. This is purely because of physical proximity. If that single shared boundary plate or a seal happens to fail, there is a very real risk of hydrocarbon migration directly into that adjacent space.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept if you think about it like an apartment building. The unit where someone smokes constantly, that's your cargo tank. That's Zone 0. The hazard is a permanent fact of life. The neighbor sharing a thin wall absorbs some of that risk just by proximity. That's your adjacent cofferdam, strictly classified as Zone 1. Finally, the building lobby, 3 floors away, wide open and well ventilated, while it barely registers the smoke at all. That's your topsides deck, sitting comfortably at Zone 2.
So, why does mapping all of this out actually matter in the real world? Because the physical zone dictates the hardware you're allowed to use. A permanent Zone 0 environment absolutely demands intrinsically safe XIA gear. That's equipment that is fundamentally incapable of producing an igniting spark, like specific sensors sitting right inside the tanks. But moving to the lower risks of Zones 1 and 2 allows for explosion-proof XD enclosures or non-sparking alternatives for things like junction boxes and transmitters. Getting the zone right means getting the safety hardware right without massively over-engineering the entire ship. All right, let's pause the tour for a quick pop quiz to test what we've covered so far. I want you to apply that boundary rule we just talked about. Imagine a ballast tank sitting directly beneath a cargo tank.
They're separated by just a single steel plate. What hazardous zone should that ballast tank be classified as? Take a second to think about it.
And the answer is Zone 1. Even though that ballast tank is normally just holding harmless seawater, its physical adjacency to a continuous Zone 0 space means the risk just isn't zero. Because there's a real physical risk of hydrocarbon migration if that one structural plate fails, it absolutely cannot be left unclassified. It has to be treated as a Zone 1 area.
So you can now officially zone the two biggest structural pieces of an FSPO. We've seen how the open topsides are in a general Zone 2 with those local Zone 1 pockets thanks to wind-driven ventilation, and we've explored why cargo tanks are permanently Zone 0, dragging their adjacent boundary spaces right into Zone 1. But what happens when you introduce live reservoir fluid through a constantly rotating ship joint? Or when you have massive gas turbines pulling in air right above these hazardous decks? Well, those are the trickiest special cases of all, and we're going to tackle them in our next explainer. Until then, ask yourself, how many potential failure points are sitting right next door to your facility's safest spaces?